All right, review, look at the next page. If you look at the next page, you'll see I have here 5 companies. You have sales revenue, net income, assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity for each, and some of the company's ratios. All the companies have the same sales revenue, 100,000. But they have different amounts of everything else. So if you see here, net income varies. Oh, net income, and they also have the same amount of net income. And the same amount of assets. But they have different amounts of, sorry about that, liabilities and stockholders' equity. Which company, Corporation A, has the least amount of liabilities, whereas Corporation E has the greatest amount of liabilities? So right now, calculate the ratios for C, D, and E, and then do a DuPont analysis for each one of them. The DuPont analysis, remember, is to calculate return on sales by asset turnover to get return on assets, and then multiply return on assets by financial leverage to get return on equity. So calculate all of those right now. So we've got return on sales here. Where's return on sales for C, D, and E? C? It's 10% across the board. %10 across the board. How about asset turnover? Sales revenue divided by assets. It's always 1 because sales is always 100 and assets is always 100, so it's always going to be 1. So return on assets is always 10%. But now watch what happens. Financial leverage, we multiply return on assets by financial leverage. That's assets divided by stockholders' equity, get return on equity. So look at this formula. It's going to work kind of like this. You have return on assets is net income divided by assets. And financial leverage is assets divided by stockholders' equity. So the result of this, net income divided by stockholders' equity, is also the same as return on equity. So return on equity is the return you get for your stock as opposed to return on assets. So return on assets times this measure called financial leverage gives you return on equity. Financial leverage in the first example was 1 because it was 100 divided by 100. But in B, let me make this a little smaller here. In B, it was 100 divided by 75 at 1.33. In C, it was 100 divided by what? 50 stockholders' equity. So it's going to be equal to 2. In D, it's 100 divided by 25, or 4. And in E, it's 100 divided by 4, or 25. So you return on equity, net income divided by stockholders' equity, 1 divided by 5 would be 20%. In Corporation D, it's 10 divided by 50. Let me give you the formula here. In D, it would be $10 net income divided by stockholders' equity of 25, which is equal to 40%. And in E, 10 divided by 4 would be equal to 250%. And if you want, you go 10% times 2 is 20%, 10% times 4 is 40%, 10% times 25 is 250%. Wow. Now, the debt ratio, just so you know, liabilities divided by assets. So the debt ratio in the first example was 0, 25%, 50% for corporation C. For D, it's 75%, and for E, it's precarious 96%. Does this look strange to you? Well, wait a second. All 5 companies have the same amount of sales, and all 5 companies have the same amount of net income, right? And yet, Corporation D is able to deliver, Corporation A has a 10% return on equity, B is 13%, that's nice, right? C is 20%, D is 40%. 40% return on equity is really high, and E is a 250% return on equity. How did C, D, and E manage, even though all 5 companies have the same level of profitability, how did C, D, and E manage to get so profitable? What exactly did they do? Would you all like to manufacture profits out of thin air? Yeah, of course you would. Right? That's what we want to do in management, right? Is we want to create shareholder value. That's profits. So C, D, and E somehow has a beautiful return on equity. 40% is really great. 250% is beyond belief. What did they do to get their return on equity so high? You have no idea. What? They have higher liabilities and lower stockholders' equity. So the more liabilities that you have, because you can track it right here in the debt ratio below, the higher your return on equity. Wait, I thought if you borrow too much money, then you're going to lose money. Right? If you borrow too much money, you lose, because then you can't pay back your debt and the interest is really high, right? Because these companies with high debt ratio have huge interest payments to make. So how is it that their return on equity is so beautifully high? Debt makes profits? Is that what we're saying here? It does on paper over here, right? This is all laid out for you very nicely to show exactly how you can create profit through a purely financial solution. The financial solution is more debt, less equity. And you will be rich. So, does everyone follow what's going on here? By borrowing more money, you can increase, in essence, you're multiplying your return on equity here. And these returns are beautiful. Now, famous economist says there's no such thing as a free lunch. Right? So if there's no such thing as a free lunch, what's to lose? The interest payment. But this takes into account, look, they all have the same amount of income. Right? If you have a higher interest payment, okay, now I'm going to pull out the heavy artillery. You have higher interest payments, right? But you have less dividends. You have no shareholders. Corporation E barely has any shareholders. So Corporation E doesn't have to pay much dividends. It's paying interest instead. And I'll have you know that interest is tax deductible. Dividends are not. So you'd really be better off paying interest. That doesn't take into account here. But that would further improve the performance of D&E over the other companies. So Billy, you have what's wrong? What's wrong here? What's wrong with this analysis?
I mean, the whole stockholder equity stuff, that's only $4.
Yeah.
But,
It's called a leveraged buyout.
okay. Not really sure.
You can do that.
It's a leveraged buyout.
A leveraged buyout is when you buy out shareholders and when you borrow tons of money and you buy out your shareholders. So what you wind up with is you start off with a company like A, right, without much debt, or B, and you borrow a huge amount of debt, usually issue bonds. You take the proceeds of the debt, you buy back the stock of almost all the shareholders, leaving just a sliver of equity left. And then you accelerate your ROE so that it goes from a lazy, lousy, crappy 13.33% all the way up to 40, 50, 60%.
How do you raise up your ROE?
Huh?
Buying back shares.
You just buy back your shares, so you replace the debt equity with debt. And it's a good deal because before you had all these stockholders, right? And you had to pay them dividends. Now you have bondholders, you can pay them interest and it's tax deductible. It's a good deal. You're better off paying interest and dividends. Isn't this beautiful? Remember when I went over, OPM, how to make money in real estate and stuff? It's the same basic principle. You operate with as little equity as possible and you'll increase your ROE by borrowing a lot of money. What was the downside of this? Okay, if you miss a dividend payment, what do your shareholders do to you? They'll have to get over it, right? If you miss, because you could legally not pay a dividend, that's fine. Their companies don't pay dividends for years. If you miss an interest payment or a principal payment on your bonds, what happens? You're in default on your debt, and then what? The debt holders can foreclose on your assets or force you into bankruptcy. There's a big difference there, right? You miss a dividend, okay, that's sad. You miss an interest payment, you're gone, right? Your debt holders come to the door and they want to renegotiate, and you're in big trouble. Big difference there. So this company here, A, is living in serenity because they don't have to worry too much about anything. They have profits, don't have profits, pay dividends, don't pay dividends. It's a nice, easygoing world, right? This company over here is under a lot of stress because if they have a bad quarter, or worse yet, a bad year where they lose money, and they don't have enough cash flow to pay their interest payments, they're out of here. So this company here is relatively risk-free. That's why return on equity is so low, because there's very little risk. This company is incredibly risky, and while it might offer a good return on equity if everything goes well, if things don't go well, it may disappear tomorrow. That is the difference. Let's quickly answer the questions then. I don't think it's necessary even to answer them, but let's do it anyway. Compute the ratios for corporations C, D, and E and record in the DuPont analysis. As liabilities increase, which ratios remain the same? Return on sales, asset turnover remains the same. Return on assets all remain the same. But which ones change? Financial leverage, ROE, and debt. Which ones increase? Financial leverage increases. All of these increase. Corporation D has a debt ratio of 75%, which results in financial leverage ratio of 4. This just gives you the formula. Therefore, return on equity is 4 times greater than ROA. So what the financial leverage does, it tells you how many more times ROE will be than ROA. Higher debt results in a higher debt ratio, which leads to higher financial leverage, which results in a higher ROE. Because, and this is the key part, shareholders are assuming higher risk. Now, they have the idea of primary drivers over here. So, for example, what we see is, let's skip this primary driver part, because it always drives everybody crazy. And let's just leave this where we left it. Okay, good. So please do activity 39 for homework. And I will, you don't have to do it up until it gets to the primary drivers. So question 5 is about primary drivers. You don't have to do that.